This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Lee Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our 2018-19 preview of the Southeast Division. We take on the 5 teams repping out of the Southeast. You know how we do, man. I got to do with my right-hand man, 50 grand. www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. Here to ride with me so we can discuss this division. My man, Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Are you ready to talk about them teams that we repping out of your neck of the woods?
Yeah, we absolutely are. We're doing a little bit earlier this year. Ordinarily, I wait till I go to Miami Heat summer day, a media day and all that and stuff like that. But bump that. We got an amazing guest, so we're going to go ahead and roll that thing out right now. But before we move into that, man, I just want to shout out our guy, Carl Bullock, doing an amazing job on social media for us now with NBA Baseline, our new social media guy, doing some amazing things. So make sure you hit him up, hit us up, NBA Baseline on Twitter, Instagram, the whole nine, man. Again, shout out to Carl, our social media guy, bro.
Yeah, most definitely, man. New player on board, rolling with the Baseline boys, man. He is doing some awesome work. So he definitely wants to hear from you, and we definitely want to hear from you. You know how to get at my man at Shaw Sports NBA, or get at me at GameFace Lee. We are previewing the 2018-19 NBA season for the Southeast Division. It's going to be a very, very interesting division for us to really dive into. And I think we've got the right man who's going to jump on board in the next few moments. He's one of our insiders, our man, Brandon Johnson. He's going to help us break down the Southeast Division. So as always, we appreciate you and yours for tuning in with the Baseline NBA podcast. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Be sure to get at us at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee, the show's Twitter handle, at NBA Baseline. You know how we are. You know where we are. We always encourage you to download any of the major platforms. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in association. We're also featured exclusively on Dash Radio. And I think in the next week or so, we will actually be your wake-up call to the NBA. Starting Tuesdays at 9 a.m., you can catch the Baseline boys giving you that morning ride to wherever your destination is, getting you geared up for this NBA season. So be sure to check us out and be sure to catch us on the social media platforms. Hey, man, all hands on deck. And, of course, we certainly show love to those who show love to us back. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's talk Southeast Division basketball here on The Breakdown. Time to break it down. Time now for The Breakdown. Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And as we are ready to talk Southeast Division basketball, we are definitely going to bring on one of our peoples who are going to help us get a little bit more on the inner workings of this very, very peculiar division in and itself. We got our man, Brandon Johnson. He's one of our beat writers. He also covers the NBA like no other. Brandon, thank you for jumping on board to help formulate the trifecta of discussing the Southeast Division, brother.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Now, I know that this is your first time jumping on, so no pressure whatsoever. But I do, and we usually like to do this, especially with our guest insiders when we're discussing and previewing the NBA. I do want to get your thoughts about what you saw from the Southeast Division last season. One of the things that really stood out to myself, and you know, I don't want to obviously speak for my man Shaw here, but one of the things that stood out to me is that the Southeast Division continually teases us with this, you know, this potential about being, you know, an up-and-coming division. You've got one of those foundation teams like the Washington Wizards, always got talent. And then we always got those question marks with the talent on teams like the Orlando Magic and like the Charlotte Hornets. Give me your take about what you saw and what you felt about this Southeast Division.
Well, I'll just say broadly, I mean, the variation, like you mentioned, is really key in trying to understand this division. You know, 2 years ago, 2016, you have 4 of the 5 teams make the playoffs. Now this year, you're looking at the Heat and the Washington Wizards trying to, you know, jockey for position. You know, I'm kind of underwhelmed overall by the division. I think that, you know, there's some teams that need to step it up, namely the Magic, the Hawks. I think they're getting there, but largely I'm just underwhelmed by the output.
All right, and you know what? That is a great segue into us discussing these teams. And, obviously, the way that we format our previews is we start from the bottom up. So let's talk about that team that finished last in the division, and that's the Atlanta Hawks. The Atlanta Hawks last season finished with a 24-58 record. And by all points, in the way that that team was structured, this was supposed to be a rebuild project. And now with Budenholzer gone, Coach Bud gone, right? This is now a reclamation project. You look at what they did in the off season. Obviously, the big topic of conversation is the GM Travis Schlenk going for the gusto, moving Luka Doncic, who they had with that pick, to get Trae Young. They bring in Vince Carter. You have a new head coach now taking the helm in Lloyd Pierce. So I'm going to start with you with this one. Are we really talking about this as being a rebuilding project, or is this more about the risk that the GM took in the way that they want to move this Atlanta Hawks franchise forward?
Well, I'll say there's definitely some risk involved. Anytime you're dealing with a batch of young players, you're going to get a lot of risk, upside, downside, highs and lows. But that said, you mentioned parting ways with Bud, and I think that's been so great in terms of showing initiative on the behalf of the organization. He was the president of basketball operations and the head coach, and I think that's just a messy situation. We see it with Doc Rivers, you see it with Tibbs up in Minnesota. So I definitely think that trying to bring in a couple new faces, one, a brand new coach who's never had head coaching experience to develop his players, and then having Travis Schlenk, who has Golden State Warriors experience coming. I think that's going to be a really great marriage.
So when I look at this Atlanta Hawks team, we start as terms of looking at the fact that they are trying to rebuild. Not a lot of overall great talent, I think, for Pierce to work with. I think in this first season, if you're looking at this roster there, Brandon, John Collins, Trae Young, obviously they stand out. But are there any other jewels in the Nile, so to speak? Do you believe that Torian Prince and somebody like that can kind of step up now and really be a force, or maybe even Alex Len, who's kind of a cast off of Phoenix?
The first name I go to, Torian Prince is definitely a great start. I think he has something there. He's, made some strides in his first couple of years. The one I'm kind of interested in is Kent Bazemore. He signed that extension 2016, and he hasn't really lifted off. And like you said, there isn't a whole heap of talent yet. But he could be that guy who really turns this organization, becomes the face of an organization, so to speak.
I'm I'm looking at this roster, and I almost want to kind of scratch my head a little bit, right? Because to your point, Brandon, I was supposed to be high on the fact that the Hawks gave Kent Bazemore an opportunity, a chance to be kind of like the quintessential Klay Thompson of the Eastern Conference. The guy, he was under the tutelage of a Golden State Warriors team that surprised a lot of people. He comes over to Atlanta, and he's like a Swiss Army knife for that team. He gives you a little bit of defense. He improves on his three-point shooting, but yet he's still lacking with some of the requisite skills that I thought that in this transition now, with them not having a premier player, this could be the opening, the opportunity. Because when I look at some of the other players there, and this is prior to getting Trae Young, but look at some of the other players there, nobody could do what Kent Bazemore I thought was capable of doing for them. Now they have Trae Young, and I'm just beginning to wonder if this is going to be yet another stumbling block for a guy like Kent Bazemore, who averaged 12.9 points per game. But this to me is a guy that should be averaging 15, 17 points per game easy. And I don't know if that's going to come any easier, because it seems like the focus is definitely going to be on the emergence and the hype of Trae Young.
That's a fantastic point, and I definitely think that Kent Bazemore, like you said, this is his opportunity. This is kind of his make or break season. Because he's a guy with with talent that could be used in a lot of different situations. But the fact that Atlanta believed in him, I think that should help his confidence going in. Trae Young is going to bring what he brings. Kevin Herter is going to bring what he brings. But Kent Bazemore, this is really his opportunity to say, look, I have the experience here. I've been in this situation for a while. You need to trust me and let me kind of lead the way here.
So I'm concerned about this Atlanta Hawks team because there's nothing that they do well, and that's to be expected of a young team that's in a rebuild mode. But they're not a great rebounding team. They don't score baskets. They don't play good defense. They just don't have anything really that's going for them at this stage of the game. They bring a guy like Vince Carter over. They bring a guy like Jeremy Lin over into this. How do you think those two guys can potentially help them, with this overall roster? Again, is it the quintessential veteran guys and they'll help, teach the young guys away type of situation? Or can they actually expect to get something out of maybe Jeremy Lin, especially at that point guard situation, sharing that with Trey Young and even in the backcourt overall with Kent Bazemore?
I'll be 100% honest. I really didn't understand the Jeremy Lin move. He's a guy who I really enjoyed watching him from the Lin Sanity days and to seeing how he fit in. My favorite iteration with him of him was with the Charlotte Hornets a couple years ago, running with Kemba Walker. That said, with Trey Young kind of being the focal point, and then you have Kent Bazemore, I'm not sure how much you're going to get of Jeremy Lin kind of letting him do what he does best. So Jeremy Lin, I think he might find himself just trying to get his health back and trying to find his next place after this deal runs out. But as far as Vince Carter, I mean, he could be a really good face. I don't see him contributing too much. We've just seen his minutes and his production kind of drop off. He still can, get up a couple times, but I don't see him doing too much on court for this team.
Joe, I'm really curious for you and in seeing how this Atlanta Hawks team is built right now, and you have a first year head coach in Lloyd Pierce. Who's going to be Pierce's shining star? There's been a lot of conversations through the various NBA sites. They're looking at Dwayne Dedman as being a key player to come in and really not just up his numbers, but really up his name in the annals right now of being premier front court players in the NBA, like getting enough shine. Do you think that Lloyd Pierce leans on him, and this could be a breakout year, so to speak, for Dwayne Dedman, that he's just more than a role player, that he could actually contribute in a significant way for a struggling basketball team like the Atlanta Hawks?
Well, yeah, you're right. I think in a situation like this, the door's wide open for everybody. There's no guy that's the dude who just go ahead and do your thing. I think even with Trey Young, they realize they need to bring him along slowly so that they don't ruin him and put too much pressure on him in order to succeed. We spoke a couple of weeks ago, about my thoughts on John Collins and how I think he's a guy who could potentially average double this year. But I think Dedman is definitely right up there in terms of a guy who could break out. Now, you still, like I talked about Alex Len a little bit earlier. I know he was a bust in Phoenix. I understand that, but I still feel like there's something there that maybe a change of scenery and consistent minutes maybe he can get. But does that end up being a complete timeshare and that he doesn't get to develop, or does he cut into the way that Dedman, as you're alluding to, maybe that he doesn't develop in the same manner? I think Pierce has some very interesting players on this roster. I even like their wings. I like Pierce. I like Justin Anderson and Bembry specifically. I know Bembry's been in our lineup with some injuries. And Anderson just hasn't really found his way, but I think he's a guy who is just looking for that opportunity. It will be really interesting to see who emerges as kind of that second option, so to speak. It's like, oh, we didn't see that coming because we spent a lot of time here talking about Bazemore, but you have obviously Lynn, you have Prince, you have Anderson, you have Bembry, and even Dwayne Dedman, as you alluded to, of guys who are looking to try to break out. What do you think about that, Brandon?
The first name I thought of was actually Justin Anderson, who I think kind of flew under the radar with this team in terms of an acquisition. But he only played 38 games for the Philadelphia 76ers last season, only 14 minutes per game. But he has that kind of spark plug, infectious energy that I think can kind of set a team that's this young straight. Give them an idea of what they need to bring every night. Like you said, they don't have the best defense, they don't have the best offense, but having an energy and not looking like they're lifeless out there, that's going to kind of help this organization turn the corner.
And we'd be hard pressed for us to not talk about the elephant in the room, which is Trey Young. I know we spent a lot about what this team might look like, but clearly everybody's going to be focused on whether or not Trey Young is the truth. And I think a lot of that is going to be focused on what I consider it was the bold, the beautiful in this case, with the general manager Travis Schlenk pulling the trigger to get Trey Young on this basketball team. So I'll quickly ask you, Brandon, what are the expectations of Trey Young for this team? And do you think that he's capable of living up to the hype of being the quote unquote number one option for the Atlanta Hawks?
I definitely think that is what kind of guided this trade for Luka Doncic, to be the number one option and kind of be the face of that organization. When I think of Southeast Division teams as a whole, a lot of them don't seem to have that number one icon. Kemba Walker, okay, John Wall, okay, but for the bottom few teams or the teams that shuffle around, they don't always have that option. So Trey Young, that's definitely the first thing that comes to mind with me, making sure that he is the guy for the Hawks to turn to. And it's going to be tough. He has a huge weight on his shoulders, but they believe in him and they picked him because they believe he can rise to that occasion. And I think the Hawks are a good situation for him to do that in.
Definitely huge shoes to fill. All right, let's go ahead and talk Westgate odds. Shaw, for the Atlanta Hawks, they're talking 24 wins. looks like they have no problem at least doing that, what they did last year. Do they equate last season's totals, or are they going to fall under or over?
I think, I mean, it's probably, I'd go with the push. I think that's probably right in that mold. They're not better than last year, but they're not necessarily worse either. And then you want to see how this young talent kind of cultivates and how it mixes together. I think even kind of going back to the earlier point with Young, we talked about this on our show, a couple weeks back as well too. I want to see him use his best skill, which I think right now is his passing, getting guys open, and which will maybe get the defensive sag off in that time, so he can get some great shots and knock down that triple like he's so apt to do. I think if they play him in that role where he can be a good playmaker and facilitator for this roster, they can have some nice moments and surprise some teams. But I think 24, 25 wins is right about where they should be.
How about you, Brandon? What are we talking about? Over or under on the 24 wins?
I would give them a very, very slight chance of an over. I don't see them necessarily getting a lot worse. 24, I think, is a good benchmark. But they also, like you said, they have some pieces. They have this new energy that's coming into the organization this year. So I don't think they can really regress from here. So I think definitely 24, 25 is a safe one to put them in.
All right, you're tuned to the Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we preview the Southeast Division for the 2018-2019 season. And alongside with us, we have our special guest, Brandon Johnson. Be sure to catch him on Twitter at BJohnsonNBA. All right, let's talk about the team that finished fourth in the Southeast Division, and that was the Orlando Magic. One win better than the Atlanta Hawks, so these guys were certainly scrapping at the cellar. A 25-57 record out of the division. This is a team that finished 24th in points per game, 26th in rebounding, 11th in assists, and 21 in defense points allowed. So when we talk about this Orlando Magic team, this is another team that's felt, you know what? Our tenure with our head coach is done. Frank Vogel is out as the head coach, and they decided to reshuffle the deck. Let's go ahead and get another head coach from the same division. How about Steve Clifford? So he comes in now. He's the new head coach for the Orlando Magic. This is an interesting basketball team, Shaw, because one of the things that I said is they're going to need to figure out what to do with this front court. And rather than, I guess you could say, shedding the front court, they decided to expand the front court even more, drafting Mo Bamba, not moving Vucevic, and deciding to keep Aaron Gordon, re-signing him to a 4-year, $84 million deal. I'm telling you right now, Shaw, something bad is going to happen. And I'm not talking about the passing of Richard DeVos, who I'm sure is thinking of the better days in which the Orlando Magic, when they had dominant front court players, they knew what to do with these guys.
Yeah, a special RIP to Rich DeVos, man. I know, great businessman and owner of that organization for many years. But looking at that front court situation, it is dire. You're 100% correct. Jonathan Isaac, who I saw at Summer League, looks better, looks the part. Some rumors are flying out right now that he may end up playing some small forward, and then small forward on offense, power forward on defense, or something like that. I think is what I just read. And then I guess he'd be backing up Aaron Gordon. They got to figure out what's going to happen with Terrence Ross at the 2 or the wingman position. Does he play some 3 as well? And then there's the whole Vucevic thing that's in the air. It's interesting because Vuce had some really good numbers last year. He's also a guy who's habitually injured and always goes through something, but usually heals fast, but usually takes him out for 15, 20 games at least. But he's a good basketball player, maybe not so much defensively. But I think that's a guy that they're going to be trying to move, and we're recording our Southeast preview here a little bit early, and maybe he gets moved before camp opens, but something's got to give in that situation. But I don't know if they're ready to hand the keys over to Bamba at that center position, at that starting center position, because Gordon and Isaac, that's not the position for them as well too. So they need to have some depth. They have Mozgov there as well too. He's been Quentin Richardson, traded around a couple times this summer. But I think it's something that they do need to address immediately, especially in the case of Vucevic, who is a good player who can contribute somewhere else, and they maybe get some assets for him. Where are you at on the Vucevic situation, Brandon, and what do you think they need to do about the front court?
I understand what you're saying about possibly moving Vucevic. I think that when he's healthy, he definitely is one of their best assets. But that said, I look at his numbers. Like you said, they're getting better each year. He's become a better passer than his previous iterations. So I definitely think if they can find a way for him to still kind of be a focal point without taking too much away from Bamba, without taking too much away from Aaron Gordon or Isaacs, he could be a useful piece where he kind of mirrors the Nikola Jokic style of play, where he is coming up to the high post and, dumping down, finding the right options on offense. That said, he is a defensive liability. I think that some of their other bigs can do that better and will do that better. So if they can get a good deal and potentially get some guards in here for him, I'd definitely say they should move him.
But
Well,
doesn't
let's
this?
hold
I'm
on.
sorry.
Let's jump into that though, real quick, and let's say I would love to get your actual opinion on this because not to say we're just going to move away from the front court situation, but that point guard situation is atrocious. There's no reason why they left it the way they did, and again, there's still time, quote unquote, before the season begins. But if you're going to move Vucevic, it better be to get a point guard, of actual value in this. Again, I like DJ Augustin. Think he has value as a veteran backup, but there's no way he should be your starting point guard. And they got Jerry Grant in Chicago, and I think it's that three-way deal from earlier in the summer as well too. And I know he's put up some good numbers when he's gotten the minutes, but you just can't convince me that that's a dude that we need to be trying to build around. So that point guard situation is pretty brutal. What about you, Sia? What are you thinking about that?
So I mean, all right. Let me first quickly address the front court situation because I did want to get your guys' take real quick on something. Doesn't it just strike you a little odd though that when we're talking about this Orlando Magic team, that this is one of the bottom third teams in rebounding, and you had Vucevic, you had Aaron Gordon, you have a rough rider like Jonathan Simmons. Like, I'm not saying that these guys are top 15, but I would certainly think that they can rebound the ball significantly better than what I think that they've showed, which kind of puts an emphasis on where this team tends to lack at times: their awareness, their presence, maybe too much reliability on shooting the basketball when they really should be penetrating, getting down low in the paint. Now, with that being said, and I'll let you guys kind of, foment on that for a second. Now, with that being said, my perception about the guard situation, this to me is really a representation of the lack of direction that this basketball team has chosen to take. You had opportunities. You had guards now that are going on doing other things with other teams. With Elfrid Payton, who knows what he's going to do in New Orleans. You look at Victor Oladipo, despite him going through, the motions with the Oklahoma City Thunder, clearly he's found a home in Indiana. And I think it's buyer's remorse given what the Magic gave up to get him, right? And what the Magic essentially did to get rid of him. So if you're telling me that this is all with a means to an end, I'm still looking towards this end, but I'm telling you right now, at the present, it looks like a very, very, very subpar ending for the Magic, because no matter how good those front court guys are, unless you're telling me that Vucevic is going to be your point guard for this basketball team, ain't nobody getting the ball to their bigs, and ain't nobody getting the ball to Fournier to shoot the basketball if you're going to rely on DJ Augustin and Grant as your backcourt combination.
Well,
and look,
go ahead, Brandon. No, absolutely.
all right, here's the thing. The means to an end idea of this, I definitely agree with you. I don't think there is an end. I look back at the CEO, Alex Martin's 2016, I think it was in December, he came out and said that he thinks the Magic will be champions by 2030. Back then, that's a 14-year window that he's putting his team in. That does not give me the idea that you have a plan or anyone in the organization has a plan for where you're headed. That just says, hey, if we tell people that 14 years from now we'll be the best team in the NBA, then you're just hoping that they, buy into that. So I definitely am on board with the fact that they don't have a plan. I don't know what they think they're going to do in the foreseeable future.
Well, the interesting caveat to all of that is that it is a couple of different administrations in that front office as well, too. So, when Hammonds came over there from Milwaukee, I guess 2 years ago now, gave it a year to kind of see what was going on, and now they've made some changes. So we still have to figure out exactly what's going to happen in the backcourt overall. But this is a roster and a team that has some interesting talent, and I think there's a lot of interest. Well, I think there's some interest in Isaac, but I feel like the thing people have soured a little bit maybe on Aaron Gordon. And a lot of people think he didn't deserve the contract he got over the summer and things of that nature. Is he just a guy who can put up good numbers or decent numbers on a bad team, or is he truly a winner? And that's a question that we don't have the answer to, especially when you look at this roster and you're trying to figure out who is going to be the face of this franchise. So we know it's not anybody in the backcourt. So that obviously points to that depth in the front court in terms of Gordon, Isaac, and Vucevic. Who are you pegging as the face of the franchise for this team?
Well, so Aaron Gordon to me is a baby Blake Griffin. And I think that's the problem for the Orlando Magic. If the Orlando Magic wants to drift back to a yesteryear when Dwight Howard was your most dominant player and you kind of built around him, remember, he had a sidekick in Jameer Nelson who was always faithful to getting him the basketball. He had a somewhat faithful head coach in Stan Van Gundy, who found a way to not only please his own affirmations because he wanted his basketball team to shoot the three, but he also recognized that when you have the most dominant front court player playing that way, you can't obfuscate that. You can't avoid that. You've got to get the man the ball. The problem is that with Stan Van Gundy, he just didn't understand that sometimes it's better to play in and out basketball rather than out and in basketball. And then that's when the situation soured, when they never lived up to their expectations. The problem that I have with this Orlando Magic team, Shaw, is they have supplemental parts that they're trying to somehow, some way conjure up magically to be number one players. Like Aaron Gordon to me is an exciting basketball player, but there's nothing about his game when he came out of Arizona that tells me that he should be the face of a basketball team. He is the kind of player that you need a Jameer Nelson giving him the basketball. And if they didn't believe that that was the case with Elfrid Payton, then that means that their quote unquote experiment failed. And if you're going to go into a different direction, and listen, this is the reason why they traded to get Nikola Vucevic. He's supposed to be the number one guy. He was supposed to be their Dwight Howard, and they failed at doing that. So I think this is a severe identity crisis with the Orlando Magic. And if they're expecting to compete in the Southeast Division, they need to figure out very quickly, are they going to be a team-oriented team with good players that know how to play with each other and for each other, or are they looking for their knight in shining armor to be the face of that team, to be their Trae Young, so to speak? And are they going to buy in wholesale, go all in putting a team around that type of dude? I don't know what your take might be on this, Brandon, but that's certainly how I feel about this Magic team, because I've been watching this nonsense going on way too long with these dudes.
No, I really like the comparison to a Blake Griffin. He has that. He came out with the dunks. That's what he was known for. And we saw in the last couple seasons, and particularly this season, he improved his shot. But again, like you said, I don't see him the way that, and even with Blake Griffin and the Clippers, he wasn't necessarily the face of that organization. We always looked at Chris Paul as being the face of that
Exactly.
organization.
The moment Chris Paul came in there, you knew Chris Paul was not giving up the idea that he was not a number one guy or to be perceived as the leader of that guy. And I think that really hurt Blake Griffin.
And but how much of that is the fact that Chris Paul went into that situation with someone like Doc Rivers giving him the gusto, giving him the opportunity? I'm not sure that anyone on the Magic have that same type of relationship with, now I guess, Steve Clifford coming in, having that relationship, knowing that, hey, going into the season, I'm the guy. The way that we talked about Trae Young, he has that opportunity potentially with Lloyd Pierce just saying, hey, you are our number one option. I don't know anybody on this team who has that point guard or otherwise, and that's going to be a huge problem.
Well, the final thing I think we need to talk about before we get to the Westgate Dot is obviously the addition of Clifford, as on that bench and what he's going to be looking to do to try to development wise. He did a really good job his first year in Charlotte. I think last year he got them into the playoffs and they saw some improvement. Then he's had some regression ever since then. He obviously had his health issues and things of that nature as well. But typically a hard-minded coach who believes in defense and defensive principles. Team that was 18th in defensive rating last year. Is this something that he can try to get some of these guys to do, especially if they have Isaacs healthy all year? Can they utilize his length? Can you get Gordon to buy in? Can you figure out a way to make Vucevic play any type of defense at all? It seems like a stretch, but then that comes into how many minutes does Bamba end up playing as well, too. So you put that lineup out there, you have some length. Is that something that Clifford can really rely on and maybe get the team to where they can hang their hat on in terms of defensively? CL, Brandon, just to go CL, go with you first. What do you think about Clifford's ability to get the team to play defense?
Well, listen, this is that 1 year window of giving the Orlando Magic faithful a glimmer of hope, right? That Amway Arena, the new Amway Arena, has only been built for recently over the last few years, right? It's only been like 5 years since we've seen this new arena. So one of the things that I'm thinking of is they obviously recognize that this team needs to show signs of improvement. It's not even just about this team being exciting. They just need to look like they want to win basketball games. And I will say this much. The pressure on this Magic team is even stronger because when you look at the Southeast Division, this has been a division that's been languishing in mediocrity for quite some time. It's been a toss-up every single year. There's been no true dominance of this division since LeBron James left the Miami Heat. So when I'm thinking about this Orlando Magic team, people out in Orlando are getting impatient. They want to see this team win basketball games. And maybe that's part of the reason why the Orlando Magic decided to go with Steve Clifford, not because of his familiarity with the Southeast Division, but simply because he looks like the kind of guy that might help this team turn things around very quickly in a much shorter time frame. And to me, I think that spells a level of desperation in the sense that this is a Magic team that needs to start winning games in a mediocre division and at least start putting themselves in the conversation of being one of those lower tier playoff type teams. And if they're not going to do that, then there's really going to be a lot of questions to be had about not just this organization, but also the viability of this being a basketball team that deserves to be in Orlando.
You see, the problem I have with Steve Clifford coming in is the fact that I liked him as the Hornets coach. I mentioned the 2016 Hornets were one of my favorite teams to watch. But that said, I look at him and I think he's going to end up a lot kind of like how Frank Vogel did, where we praise him for his defensive ability and we praise him for his mindset. But as soon as things don't turn around in a short enough time frame, he'll become the scapegoat, and that's just going to keep the Magic from moving forward as an organization as a whole, because they always look to, okay, well, this coach isn't working, or maybe it's this one player who isn't working. So I definitely think that he kind of fell into a bad situation. I mean, he needed a job, that's great, but I definitely think he might end up being the scapegoat in this situation.
All right, let's go ahead and talk Westgate odds. Shaw, Westgate is talking 31 wins for the Orlando Magic. Is that too high aspiration for a team that only amassed 25?
Yeah, it's a great. They do a great job with this. I'm just going to go slightly under. I think they'll probably be at maybe 28, 29. They have the potential, I think, if everyone is healthy, and especially if they fix their point guard situation before the season is out, where they could potentially surprise some teams and get into maybe a 34, 35 win range. But I'm a little bullish, or not bullish. I'm a little underwhelmed, as we said earlier, about what they're going to be able to do. I think offensively and defensively, and health wise as well too. Gordon has had some nagging injuries to go along with Vucevic. Isaac was out all last year. Fournier, who we didn't really talk about much. He's been pretty solid, but I don't want to have to be relying on Fournier to be an offensive threat the entire season. So I'm going to go slightly under.
For me, I honestly don't see this Magic team being better than the Atlanta Hawks. I know that's kind of hard to believe because at least the Hawks have, or I mean, the Magic have some players that have basketball experience. But that said, I don't have faith in this organization as a whole. They haven't done enough to say, we are moving forward together. It's, kind of piece by piece, and I don't think they have a direction. So I wouldn't put them higher than the Hawks. I think 31 is generous.
Woo. My man, Brandon, laying down the smack. Not even smacking them down, just laying down the smack on the Orlando Magic. You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we give you our 2018-19 preview of the Southeast Division. All right, let's go ahead and keep things moving along. In third place last season, the Charlotte Hornets, a team that finished 36-46, averaged 108 points per game. Defensively also gave up 108 points per game. We just finished talking about Orlando's new head coach in Steve Clifford. So what does that mean? The Charlotte Hornets decided to go ahead and get themselves a new head coach, and so starts the era of James Borrego. I'm thinking about this basketball team, Shaw, and I keep saying to myself, man, are they ready to sting or be stung? They decide to they decide that this, now they got Mitch Kupchak, you know what I'm saying, who he was doing his LA thing, now he's doing his Charlotte thing. They decide to bring in Tony Parker. I'm not sure, to mentor Kemba. I don't know what that is, but look, man, this team is a team that could be very interesting in a division where there's so many opportunities to look so good or just look so bad.
Yeah, those are great points, and the roster is still a little uneven to my liking. Kid Gilchrist, just what are we doing?
He always tilts the scale, man. I'm sorry.
What are we doing there? So I think they just kind of probably need to move away from maybe giving him plus minutes. He can still help defensively and things of that nature, but you need to be looking at how you can develop Malik Monk. We know Jeremy Lamb has been somewhat of a disappointment, but had some nice moments last year as well too, especially in plus minutes when Batum was out. And they need to just go ahead and figure out if Kaminsky is really a player. We need to get a strong look at Hernan Gomez now at that center position. Zeller too had some nice minutes before he got injured last year as well. They obviously have the Biombo and all the moving and dealings that happened with that roster as well. But what is the rotation going to shake out to be? And because they have a new coach, we don't really know what his schemes are and how he's going to mix this up a little bit. It's very much a wait and see approach, I think, with this Charlotte team. But to me, unless Malik Monk gets plus minutes and Lamb gets plus minutes, they still seem to lack some outside shooting. I know Marvin Williams at the stretch four, quote unquote stretch four, can shoot it a little bit, and Kaminsky can shoot a little bit, but they need those guys to be plus shooters and really be consistent so that Kemba can operate in some space and continue on the 3-point shooting he's been allowed. But then that goes back to what we're talking about overall, that they don't have any inside presence at all. While I'm questioning their shooting a little bit, there's nobody that you just get the ball down to and say, go ahead and get me a basket. So they got some issues there where it's going to come to when it comes to points in the paint. But it all depends on how Borrego wants to run this lineup. Brandon, what are your thoughts on the new coach and some of the roster construction of the Charlotte Hornets team?
I get a lot of what you're saying. I'm not really sure the direction of what they want to do with this roster. The one thing I will say, the Charlotte Hornets were third in rebounds per game last year, and I think a lot of that had to do with Dwight Howard. Now, we know that Dwight Howard isn't the best chemistry guy, but the one thing that he does, he gets boards. He cleans up the boards. I think that's something that's definitely going to hurt this team, because not having perfect defensive rotations, if you start allowing second, third chance shots, that's going to hurt you even more. So I definitely think that the coach needs to come in, Borrego needs to come in and kind of get an idea of what his who his centerpiece is going to be.
I'm really when we talking about the Charlotte Hornets, I'm gonna bring this right back to you, Brandon. Why are we talking about Marvin Williams still starting with this as their power forward? Why are we talking about Micah Gilchrist as their starting shooting forward? I'm just saying, like, at some point you have to start and Sean knows this. This is like my greatest pet peeve. At some point, when you look at a team and you've seen really where they have peaked, where they have plateaued, you have got to start looking at improving your roster. I go back, not to get off of the division, but I go, and maybe if anything, the best test case is the Golden State Warriors. When the Golden State Warriors got knocked off by the Cleveland Cavaliers in Game 7 of the NBA Finals a few years ago, they recognized very quickly that Harrison Barnes, Andrew Bogut was not going to cut it for this basketball team if they were going to get back to the finals again. So while they were still a good enough basketball team the year previous with that same roster, they clearly were not good enough a year later to be able to beat that team in Cleveland. And what did they do? They upgraded their positions. It wasn't gut the team or anything like that, but they recognized you can't replace Steph Curry. He's the best that you're going to get out of that area. You ain't going to replace Klay Thompson. You ain't going to replace Draymond Green, but you can replace Harrison Barnes, and you go replace him with Kevin Durant. And at some point, if you're talking about the Charlotte Hornets being a legitimate basketball team, when you have a legitimate point guard in Kemba, a point scoring guard in Kemba Walker, you cannot tell me that sticking with Marvin Williams and Michael Kidd-Gilchrist is somehow going to make this basketball team better, when the best that you've been able to do is get to the first round and get knocked out of the first round of the playoffs in only one of the 3-4 years that Steve Clifford was your head coach.
Look, not at all. I definitely don't think that Marvin Williams is their go-to guy. But the problem is, who do they replace him with? Who do you entice to come to Charlotte to say, hey, you're going to be one of our leaders? Kemba Walker fell into their laps, and they even looked at him and were considering getting rid of him if the right deal came up. So my problem is, I look at, for example, we haven't gotten there yet, but the Heat, 2016, they have free agents, top-tier free agents, having meetings with their organization. You don't hear that coming out of Charlotte. So when you want to get rid of I'm sure they want to find that next piece, those next great pieces to turn the organization around. But if you don't have interest, then there's not a lot you can do in that situation.
But I will just to kind of reply back to your point, though. I think it brings back to the point that Shaw was making. You've got guys like Frank Kaminsky, Cody Zeller. I don't think those guys have really been given a fair opportunity to go out there and show you why they even bothered to draft these guys. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, when I look at what Frank Kaminsky is capable of doing, the fact that he can shoot the ball better than Marvin Williams, maybe he's not as athletic, but he certainly, to me, can give you a little bit more than what I think you've been asking Marvin Williams to have been doing for the last 10 years since he came out of North Carolina. I just feel like there's been a level of hesitance to even scout out what the talent is on your team. So even if the idea is that you want to go, you can't find anybody in free agency, you certainly haven't awarded any of the other role players opportunities to even be better than what your starting five has been amassed so far. Even when you went and got Nicholas Batum, and when you have Kemba Walker playing at an all high level, and even when you had Dwight Howard, I still felt like they were just obfuscating the idea that we don't know about the guys that we have. We're just going to keep them around for however long we're going to keep them around and then stall out on it. Am I off on that thought process, Shaw?
Well, not so much. It's just a matter of this is a. It feels like we're talking about all these teams, and they've had so much change, coaching wise, and even so in their front office. So I think Kupchak is brought there because of his pedigree and what he did in LA, and his relationships with agents and potentially even with some players. So I think this is a year. They're going to be looking at Chupta to be able, especially for next summer, to be able to bring in some guys and get some of those meetings so that they can try to get this roster to be a little bit better. The problem I have is that because they're obviously looking to move Kemba, or not looking to move. They've had conversations about moving Kemba, and that could still very much be in play here. But Kemba's contract is up next year. Jeremy Lamb's contract is up next year. Kaminsky, they're going to have to decide whether they want to re-up on. But then you have Gilchrist, Marvin Williams, and Biyombo, who all have player options. And you're damn right, they're opting in. They're not going to be able to go out there and get that money elsewhere on the market. So you kind of have those contracts tied up into your roster, and those aren't the guys that you want to build around. So I think in some ways, Borrego is going to have to figure out, all right, can some of these young guys play this year? And you're right, because they have to take a look at a guy like Kaminsky and see, all right, well, do we want to give him some big money? But then I think that's what Kupchak is here for as well, too, to try to maybe shake up this roster. But I think the jewel in the now with all of this, too, and I kind of hope it happens. And I'm going off of what maybe a 10 to 15 games sample size from 2 years ago in Hernan Gomez when he was with the Knicks. But in those games, he looked like he could play. So I think he's somebody who can maybe push, at that 4 or 5 position. And maybe he's the guy who they can try to decide if he's the guy who can be there with Kemba, or not to say that they're going to build around Hernan Gomez, but maybe he can be a building block for the future.
Before we get into our Westgate odds, real quick, Brandon, do you see Kemba Walker? And we had this question based on an article that was written a couple of weeks ago, Sean and I had for our podcast. Do you see Kemba Walker as a number one option for the Charlotte Hornets basketball team this year and moving forward?
Honestly, I would like to. I look at him kind of the same way I look at John Wall. And the difference that I see there is that whereas John Wall will make him the number one option, you look at how he handled, just to foreshadow, the Marcin Gortat situation when he was out. Yeah, I want some of that from Kemba Walker because, I didn't hear anything of him when they were looking about moving him. And I feel like this is Kemba's team. This is his opportunity. He was there when they were the Bobcats. He's been there. He's a staple. So I definitely think that he can be the number one option, but he really has to show us that he wants it.
Again, I think it's something that is worth debating. Kemba's just such a quality guy. He has some of those intangibles that you want in a leader in terms of wanting to take the shot, in terms of wanting to be in the organization and speaking vocally about wanting that opportunity. He has gotten better since his rookie year. No one thought he'd be one of the leaders in three-point shooting. All of those things, he's on the right trajectory. I just don't know that his ceiling is high enough overall. So again, he's a great guy, and if you don't have a true superstar, he's not a bad option to have as somebody until you can maybe get that placeholder in play.
All right, well, let's go ahead and talk Westgate odds. Brandon, I'm going to start with you, man. They're talking about the Hornets at 35.5, over and under on the Hornets.
I definitely go maybe a little bit over on the 35.5. The Eastern Conference is the type of conference where teams can make a jump just by virtue of being in the conference. Now, look at the Nets. I'm still wondering how they're going to shape up, and some of the things we talked about, giving them kind of the Hornets a buffer. So I think 35.5 is fair, maybe a little bit over.
Yeah, I'm going to say slightly over as well. I have some faith in some of the young guys on this team. Like I mentioned, Hernan Gomez specifically, and even Malik Monk. I think he's been working hard this summer, and as a guy who's going to be able, whether he starts, comes off the bench, whatever ends up happening, I think he's going to be able to give them some great outside shooting and maybe even develop as a playmaker as well too. Pair alongside Kemba, Tony Parker, in the mold. Again, not expecting him to do much on the floor, but maybe can he kind of give them some of that championship pedigree and give them some grit. It all depends on Borrego, and what the rosters look like, but I'm going to go slightly over.
All right, you're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we keep things moving along in our 2018-19 preview of the Southeast Division. Let's talk about the Washington Wizards. They are the team that finished second in the Southeast at 43-39. This is the same roster of guys that wound up in the semifinals the year previous to that. And clearly this was just not their year last year. A team that really should have won this division. But they certainly underperformed. You can attribute it to injuries, but I think there's a lot of question marks swirling around this basketball team, especially towards the end of the season, whether or not this is Bradley Beal's team, if this is John Wall's team. I'm going to start with you on this one, Brandon. When we talk about this Washington Wizards team, there's a lot of question marks that are swirling And a lot of it is really coming down to how much longer do you continue to hold a status quo? Because it's clear that this basketball team, even with LeBron James no longer in this conference, there's still not a whole lot of confidence, even with this kind of talent, that they're capable of putting themselves in a position to compete for an Eastern Conference Finals berth, let alone an NBA Eastern Finals berth.
The hard part about the Washington Wizards is that, you look at their backcourt, Wall, Beal. You have these two all-star caliber players, and you kind of get that, Toronto Raptors of Lowry and DeRozan type feel, or the Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum type feel. And honestly, I think it's the situation where they just want this to work. They have the talent, I think, between those two guys to kind of have a solid foundation. But we've seen, again, the highs and lows. And, I think in this situation, you're bringing in Dwight Howard now, you're bringing in Austin Rivers, guys who can put up numbers and, produce. But again, you're not sure if this is going to lead them to turn the corner. So I honestly think we're in a situation where the Wizards are just hoping that something works out at this point.
So it's like a Jay-Z line. And they just mic this. They're trying to will it to happen, with a team that you don't know from a chemistry standpoint if it's going to work. And the Dwight Howard situation is very, very interesting for what this team is and what they've been trying to do. Lots of jokes and memes are ready to come out about this team and this roster. You got Howard and his personality. You got Markieff Morris, he's a little enigmatic as well too. You got Kelly Oubre. You got Austin Rivers out there, and of course John Wall and his dude, so to speak. This is a team that has all the makings and conjurings of a team that could explode. But also could boom in a positive way and be one of the better teams, especially out of this division.
This is the NBA Suicide Squad, bro.
Why? It's like it's in some without obviously without the LeBron like talent, but it's the Lakers East in some ways. You know what I mean? Just so many enigmatic personalities that you put together and saying, all right, well, let's see and hope this works. And I think in some ways they did it because this really may be the last year that they tried to make it work with this roster. I think you bring in Dwight Howard. After all the stocks that
you bring in Dwight Howard, so this is like Game of Thrones. This is it. This is the final season.
Real talk. Real talk.
He is here to end it. He is the end of days for Washington.
Either this is going to work and we're going to be able to be a team that is a formidable power in the Eastern Conference for years to come, or it might be time to go ahead and part ways. Now, again, Wallace 28 years old. He's going to be making $37 million next year. So you wonder if he's going to be the one to go, especially with 4 years on his deal after that. But it has to work this year. So Austin Rivers is on a 1-year deal. Markieff is on his last year of his deal. Howard has a player option, obviously, but Oubre is up for a deal. Jody Meeks, and he's on the anti-drug program, won't be there for the first 20 games of the season. So Deemer mentioned his personality, impact on this as well. I really do feel like this is, again, boom or bust for Washington this season.
Brandon, why are we not talking about this basketball team in, talent-wise on a roster sheet? Forget even Dwight Howard, because I guess the assumption is that Dwight Howard should be the upgrade for Marcin Gortat, right? But talent-wise, this team should be dominating at least the division. Forget the conference. They should be at least dominant. We're still going to be talking about this basketball team maybe scraping past the team that won this division last year in the Miami Heat. And that's got to say something. Like, isn't it weird that we're not saying that this is a basketball team that should be having at least 48, 50 plus wins at this particular juncture with the kind of veteranship play, the playoff experience that these guys have had, having Scott Brooks as their head coach? I mean, what is the deal with this team, bro?
I think it's definitely scary that they're not at that level. I mean, I compare them to a team like they took the Raptors, I believe, to 6 games last season. And honestly, going into the playoffs, I didn't think that they would get that far because they seemed like they were dysfunctional, but they somehow banded together. That said, part of me thinks that this is a situation where, we look at when they weren't playing with Wall. When they had Wall last year, they were 23-18. Without him, they were 20-21. But for that main stretch of games when he went out for surgery, they were 15-12. And I think the Wizards, they really the team as a whole without Wall. And so I think that maybe he's what the team thinks is holding them back because he is that star persona and he is, set to make the big bucks next year. Maybe they want to move away from him and that's going to make them turn the corner because they won't have to rely on, hey, you're our star. We have to defer to you all the time.
All right. Well, let's talk Westgate odds, man. Washington Wizards shot 44.5 on the button. Are we talking over and under?
I hate this.
Of course you do.
I do. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna take a page out of your book because you've been on the Wizards bandwagon for a little while now. Sounds like you might finally be off it. I'm gonna go and be optimistic. Think this is gonna work for a little bit and say that they're gonna go slightly over that, maybe 46, even 47 wins. Look at that, And I think potentially that could be enough to maybe win this division overall. So I'm gonna go over on Washington on this one.
All right, what are we talking about, Brandon? Over under 44.5 on the Wiz.
I want to believe in this team, so I'm gonna say over. I definitely think they have the opportunity. They have the talent. I look at someone like a Jeff Green. He comes out and he'll have a huge game. I think it was last April with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he and LeBron had almost matching 30-point games. So they have the talent. I want to believe in this team, even though they're in the division with the Heat. But I'll definitely go over.
All right, well there you have it. You guys are pretty optimistic, but like I said, they brought Dwight Howard in. You're tuned to the baseline. Callie, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we give you our 2018-19 preview of the Southeast Division. So let's talk about that team that finished first in the Southeast, and that was the Miami Heat. They finished with a 44-38 record. Clearly one of the more surprising teams. What a hell of a coaching job by Eric Spoelstra. When you look at this roster, though, man, not a whole lot was really done. So now the big question comes into play, Shaw. This is a basketball team that is clearly going to be on the button when we talk about luxury tax. Where are we? This is a team, Shaw, that I'm sure is going to be very competitive. Now that LeBron James is kind of out of the picture, we get to see a little bit more maybe from some of those guys. Maybe Eric Spoelstra probably opens things up a little bit more because now that the whole Eastern Conference is wide open, they may have to, match and play a little bit more. But who out of this roster really is going to take that step forward and own the moment, not the spotlight like Hassan Whiteside?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I really don't, because this is a team that is very, very similarly built, and I think that's what the issue is, that they have an exorbitant salary structure that has them at like something like 150 something million dollars this year, and no superstar. Like, that's absurd. And I was listening to SiriusXM a couple of weeks ago, and those guys they were going in on Miami about like, who do you look at this roster? Why do they have 7-8 guys making over $10 million when none of them are superstar or maybe even all-star level caliber players? And I know Dragic made it last year, but that was a result of injury, things of that nature. And he's now 32 years old. I think the biggest question looming over this team is not so much whether or not Dwayne Wade is coming back, but I think it's what do they get, if anything, out of Hassan Whiteside. And at this point, at his contract number, you kind of have to wipe that away. That's what it's about. Can he go out there and be productive and give you a double-double, be a defensive presence out there on every single night, and be a Dwight Howard light and not be a locker room disturbance as a result when he's getting those numbers? I think that's the biggest thing looming with this team. And then they got to figure out the overall wing situation. So I'm going to move to you, Brandon. What happens, do you think, if Wade comes back? How do you think that impacts Tyler Johnson and Dragic and Waiters, who's supposed to be healthy, and Ellington and Richardson? Can all those guys get minutes in this Spoelstra lineup?
To be perfectly honest, I think that, I was just reading on a report from Wade's camp that came out. He seems like he wants to come back, but he doesn't want to just be the bench piece. He doesn't want to be the Vince Carter of this team. He still wants to be important and feel like he's contributing. We saw in the playoffs, he came up big. I think it was game 2. But that said, I definitely think that there's a role for all these guys. Maybe not so much for Tyler Johnson. We saw he had a rough season last year, and he kind of brings a lot of a similar game to a Dwayne Wade, a young Dwayne Wade. Maybe that's overreaching, but just broadly. So I definitely think, Wayne Ellington, he is your premier shooter. He's going to get minutes. You're going to see Josh Richardson. He, I think, is the hope for this organization, and he's going to be the guy to shoulder a little bit more weight. People are waiting for him to break out. He already has the defensive capabilities, but I definitely think Josh Richardson and all these guys are going to have a lot of potential. But like I said, it's really just a matter of determining early on who is going to fit the bill and who's going to be the name that gets his team out the gates.
I just feel bad for Eric Spoelstra, man. He has to contend with, and I think this is why we don't give him enough credit for being the kind of head coach that he is. I don't know if Pat Riley likes to do this as some kind of like sick joke at times, because no head coach should have to continue to keep fighting with the roster that's being handed to them. At some point, your GM and your upper management really are looking out for your best interest. And to be honest with you, to your point, Brandon, if they brought back Dwayne Wade I would be like Dwayne Wade and be like, I don't understand why this is even a conversation to be had. There's nothing about Deion Waiters except a few moments that he shined, that he could score the basketball, but he's never been a consistent scorer. There's nothing consistent about Wayne Ellington. There's nothing consistent about Rodney McGruder. I mean, when you really look at it, for the Miami Heat's best chances to win this division again and to even be competitive in any portion of a playoffs, you would need a Dwayne Wade on this roster because none of the other players, Hassan Whiteside, Josh Richardson, Justice Winslow, Tyler Johnson, or Goran Dragic, is going to lead you to the promised land.
And I think they'll have to. They have to at least look to see what's available out there. But we all know they tried to move Whiteside, and there's just not going to be any takers on that. And another guy who has a player option, he's going to secure that bag at $27 million next year. So whatever happens, he's going to get paid that money. I can't see him taking a buyout and saying, "Oh, I'm going to forego this money and I don't want it," whatever it could be, because he struggled. And he had to work hard, quote unquote, to kind of get there. But it does bring into question, something I want to move forward to is what does the team do with Winslow? I think Bam Adebayo, I think something just came out, that they took the player option on him, for the upcoming season, and that's fine. He had a nice, productive season at that 4-5 position. But Justice Winslow, as far like those are their two young guys. Brandon, where do you stand with Justice Winslow? I mean, is I don't want to say he's a bust, but clearly he hasn't lived up to expectations. Do you think this is somebody the Heat should be trying to move away from?
I don't think that they should move away from him. I think last year they had a lot of fun working him into different lineups because you look at the Heat's roster, their only true point guard is Goran Dragic, and we know he's 32 years old. He's not going to be the future of this organization. So we saw Justice Winslow pick up some point guard minutes, and he did a decent job. He doesn't have the 3-point threat yet. I know his numbers were artificially higher because he played a little bit less, and he was shooting a little bit less, but he definitely has the flexibility to, I think, build around. Now, again, he doesn't have necessarily that star quality. And I think that's more of what they're looking for in a Josh Richardson to kind of have that breakout season. And if he doesn't, then maybe they start thinking about both their who were formerly known as Rook 1 and Rook 2 in 2015. Maybe they start thinking about moving away from them. But I'm not out on Justice Winslow yet. I definitely think he has a lot to give.
All right, well, here we go, man. Let's talk about them Westgate odds with this Miami Heat team. I'm gonna start with you, Brandon. They have Miami Heat around 41.5 wins. Are you taking the over and under?
I think they can be over. They might not, outpace the Wizards. They could. It's been a back and forth between both those organizations. Raw talent, I think the Wizards have them this year, but the Heat could surprise, and they have surprised. We saw that 30-11 finish a couple years ago. So I definitely put them over 41.
Yeah, and I'm gonna back that up. I think they'll be a little bit over 41. I've just been down here too long and know what Spoelstra is capable of. So even with this roster and it not being everything that it needs to be, even whether or not Wade comes back or not, I don't even know if that matters as much. I think Spoelstra will find a way to keep this team above 500 and challenging for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference.
All right, well, there you have it. We've gone through all of them, so now you know it's about that time. We got to put this division in its proper place. So, Brandon, I'm going to start with you. How do you see this division playing out from bottom to top?
Bottom to top, I'm going Orlando Magic 5th, Atlanta Hawks 4th, Charlotte Hornets 3rd, Miami Heat 2nd, and Washington Wizards 1st.
All right, and I have just a slightly reverse order, I guess. So I'm going to keep it pretty much in the same way at the bottom. Hawks finishing 5th, Magic 4th, Hornets 3rd, but I'll put the Heat 2nd and the Wizards 1st. Just a slight change for Brandon there at the bottom between the Magic and the Hawks.
With all of my negativity, right? All of my negativity, the status quo pretty much stays from 5 to 3. I think the Hawks are going to wind up finishing at the bottom of the division. The Magic are going to just surpass them, maybe by 1 or 2 games. The Charlotte Hornets will maintain the status quo. It's just hard pressed for me to believe that with a team that has Kemba Walker and Tony Parker and Nicholas Batum, that they would play lesser unless these guys all get injured and are gone for the rest of the season. They would play worse than the Magic and the Hawks, but they certainly would not be better than either the Heat or the Wizards. With that being said, I think that the Miami Heat take a step back. But as far as wins go, they're going to be neck and neck with the Washington Wizards. And while the Wizards are going to be the more talented basketball team, they will still prove to me that they wind up losing out to win the division. They lose up, in other words, because everyone else, I think, has taken a step back, which gives them leeway for them to step forward. So by default, I think the Washington Wizards walk away as the champs of the Southeast Division. Division. Woo! With that being said, there's some good stuff going on, man. Brandon, you came with it, bruh. Hopefully you don't get no death threats from any of the teams of the Southeast Division. Don't you know what I'm saying? Don't hit them too hard with the sharp tongue, brother.
Hey, look, they know where to find me. Come on now. I'm ready for it.
Brandon, man.
That's my dude.
Brandon, we so much appreciate you for hopping on board and helping us break down the Southeast Division, man. We can't wait to get you on board again throughout the season as we delve a lot further in not just them, but also all the stuff that's going on with the NBA, man.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw. We appreciate each and every single one of you for tuning in and hopping on board with us as we preview the Southeast Division. You know where to find us. Be sure to catch the rest of our previews for the rest of the other teams in the NBA. We'll catch up with you